Good morning, and thank you, Gary. It's always a great pleasure to be involved in conferences around the particular theme that we have today and yesterday. And I saw a number of the sessions in the program yesterday, and was here last night listening to Dave, our after-dinner speaker. And it's clear there's a lot of energy around this particular issue and this particular arena. So congratulations for that. And it's always really nice to be in Liverpool. I spoke at a wonderful conference that Liverpool John Moores organised, and I think there are about 350 people here to talk about disability, and it was in the city, and it was really phenomenal. And it took me back, and I thought about all the wonderful things that the city of Liverpool has given to the world, from the Beatles to the Liverpool Philharmonic, etc., and this wonderful docks arena. So I went back to Wolverhampton and asked the City Council, what could I say that we've done in Wolverhampton that's made a similar mark? And they told me that we are the only city in the UK that's named after a woman, which is Lady Wolfruna. I haven't actually Googled all the city names in the UK to check that, but that's what they told me. And the second thing they told me, and just remember how this impacts on your life, that we were the first city in the UK to introduce traffic lights. Now, I'd rather have the Beatles. However, I'm going to talk around inclusive learning and around how we look at issues in society and how we look at issues in universities. And I will say something about vocabulary, because vocabulary and words are really, really important. And I'll pick that up in a minute. But to start with, you got there a map of the UK, and it does include the Republic of Ireland. Why? Well, you see, what I'm going to talk about is the journey that we're on. Universities, higher education, is on a journey. It's been on a journey for a long time. It isn't there yet, but significant and substantial progress has been made. In the very early days of when you look at what university and higher education is about, you go back to the days of Aristotle and Socrates. No buildings, no facilities, no libraries, no virtual learning environment, no program specification documents, etc. But people who engaged in the development of thinking, of knowledge, and discovery. And you start to move into, slightly later, like about 700 AD, the Venerable Bede in Durham, and actually developing a concept of what is known as a community of scholars, and the bedrock of what universities were about at the time. Scholars communicating with each other, in that particular instance, around the scriptures, and about how you develop that as universities developed in Morocco and Bologna, and how they engaged. And then you had the Cardinal Newman in Ireland, all about universities, higher education is about the development of the mind, the intellectual mind, and pursuing that particular development. And we've shifted phenomenally since then. This pace of change and the speed of the journey has been quite significant. And if you look at the Deering report in 1997 about what are the purposes of higher education, why does it exist? And it is about 4 key purposes. It's about individual life chances. It's about enabling success. It's about pursuing knowledge and understanding to the benefit of the economy and society, developing the workforce of the time. It is about discovery in that knowledge. But really importantly is the last one, and particularly important for this group, is about a role in shaping a democratic, civil, and inclusive society. The sort of society in which you want your kids and your kids' kids to grow up in. And that's about fairness, that's about equality, and that is a key purpose of higher education. But as in many instances, when you look at job descriptions, when you look at role descriptions, when you look at missions, interestingly, it's put at the end in number 4. But they are part of the roles of higher education and what we're seeking to do. In 1963, in the major report on what higher education should be about, Robbins, repeated 50 years later by the previous government, university places should be available to all who are qualified for them by ability and attainment. Nowhere there does it talk about social class, does it talk about about ethnicity, does it talk about disability? It simply talks about ability and attainment. It's about our education should be available to all of those who can benefit from it. And it's higher education's role to make sure that they are able to benefit from it. And it's a significant move from those days of communities of scholars. The higher education journey and differentiating between equality of opportunity and equity. Because it's not that long ago, and you still see it in universities today, and I still hear it in my institution, where people talk about we must treat everybody the same. It's not about treating everybody the same. Yes, things need to be fair, transparent, and open, but you need to make differences, you need to make adjustments in order to give people the best possible opportunity for them. And that's a major issue for us all. Vocabulary, I said that I was talking about vocabulary, and when I first came into the university sector many, many years ago, I remember an institution I worked in where there was a committee for the support of what they referred to then as handicapped students. And language has changed over the years as part of the journey that's taken place. I'm not defending any of those words. I'm simply saying that is how reference was made. And today, that language has moved on and is far more reflective of people owning a number of those issues. But that is language that was with us. And we also had a system that was very fundamentally focused on the medical model of disability. Any of you who've worked or work in a health-related area, any of you, and most of us have at some time or other, been through the NHS in hospitals or surgeries, etc. There is a pecking order within the NHS. There is a pecking order of authority within that service. And that is very much driven by a medical model. It's a medical model driven by consultants and doctors and their position in the hierarchy. And the medical model of disability is about what's wrong with you and how can we enable you to be different? How can we cure you? As opposed to, much more importantly, what is the social model of disability? Which is about what have we done as a society to create barriers to inhibit what people can do? What have we done? And because we create a lot of those barriers. When I look at my own university, I see accesses to buildings on hills which you think, wow, did we really do that? I see areas and facilities where you say, that's not really what we need to be doing. I see communication from our registry, letters to students, which I have to spend about 5 minutes reading myself so that I can understand them. And that is all about what are we doing and how are we trying to make sure that we're more open, we're more accessible, and we're more inclusive. We have a major debate in my institution, in our city centre campus, over whether or not we should have barriers to entry and security passes, or whether we should have open access to anybody who wants to come in. And there's a tension. There's a tension there between our security staff who wish to maintain security and myself and others who just say, just let everybody come in. Universities should be part of the community in which they are based. And if people want to come in, great. And if they want to come in and sit in somebody's lecture, fine. Most of my colleagues in the university talk about students not coming to the lecture, so somebody else coming in should help them. But it is very much about looking and thinking about what we do in a range of areas, from employment practice to teaching practice to simple accessibility. You know, where we have ramps, where the height of doorknobs, buttons on lifts, obstacles in the way of people for some of the very obvious disabilities. So the social model is about, we need to change and we can change, and we need to think about that when we do it. Now, significant change has been led over the whole concept of moving away from this aspect of community of scholars, discovery and invention, to what about the student? And HEFCE, as it was, made a big statement around this. And the first funding it did for disability initiatives was in the early 1990s. And what HEFCE did, and OFS is continuing, is to say that there are a number of aspects that we need to look at in order to actually move and help and assist the student. And institutions need to address how they deal with disability, how they look at their learning and teaching strategies, and how they widen access to university education. How they enable more people from different backgrounds to engage and to succeed. And they've been doing that since, as I said, the early 90s. And in 2001, which is 17 years ago, they called on universities to have coherent, holistic strategies that bring together their promotional material, their access arrangements, their learning and teaching, and their student success. Today, we're still seeking to do that. But, as I've said a number of times, the journey is really important because we're not there. There will be in your universities, in every university, some excellent practice in supporting disabled students. There will be other areas of your university where it's not quite as good because we haven't got that holistic approach. And HEFCE did, there was a study by HEFCE recently asking institutions where they were at on support for disabled students in the context of a holistic approach. And I think universities were quite open in saying they're not there yet, but they're making progress. This is the number, just slides just saying that, the numbers of students who are declaring a disability has increased quite significantly over a period of time. And there's a mix there. And we all know about the mix, about self-declaration, and people being more confident about declaring, as well as there being an increase. And you want that graph to continue to rise because it is yet to be fully representative of society. Key issue, and Dave picked up on some of that last night, is around the issue of those reporting a mental health condition, mental health illness. where there has been a phenomenal increase, absolutely phenomenal increase. And it's about how does an institution address that? We also know that how students perform is differential on the basis of some of their background. Detailed, significant study undertaken by Higher Education Funding Council for England over a period of years, now undertaken by OFS, saying when you actually look at moderating students on the basis of what entry tariff they came in with, what happens to them? And what it essentially tells us is there's a differential outcome. And to put it really bluntly, a disabled student entering our universities is 10% less likely to be satisfied than other students, and it will not achieve at the same level as other students. So they're entering at the same academic level, but they're not getting to the same outcome as others. And that has been happening for decades. And it happens in other groups as well, particularly in the BAME area. But I'm talking about disability at the moment. And then when you look at employability, yeah, you've got the same issue. Disabled students are not as able in the employment market to perform like others. And that is after years and years and years of a disabled students allowance and support for learners. And when we look at the DSA, what it became was really something that let universities off the hook. It became a deficit model of education, where we assess a student's physical and learning needs, we identify a resource that will come down from government, and we then negotiate a contract with the faculty, with the department, with the estates department over the provision of service. Looking at the individual, but making good what deficiencies we have as an institution. And when you look at any form of support for learners coming in, a deficit model doesn't take the institution on, doesn't take the whole institution on, doesn't address student learning issues completely, but simply looks at the individual, which is important for that individual. So the government significantly changed the DSA, and about a year after it changed the DSA, it thought it would be a good idea to have some guidance on what that might mean. Normally you do the guidance before the change, but we didn't. They didn't. Freudian slip. And they set up the disabled sector, student sector leadership group to say, can you advise the sector on what we should be doing? I was asked to lead that, and we brought together people from different institutions, different organizations, and created guidance about inclusivity and about inclusive learning and about how you move the agenda on. And that was sent to all universities in January 16. Might have been 17, I could get my years wrong. Sent to all of them, but really, really importantly, we didn't just send it to the Vice-Chancellor. We spent a lot of time talking to Pro-Vice-Chancellor's institutions, but we sent it to the Vice-Chancellor's boss. Because what that guidance says is under the Equality Act, it is the Board of Governors' responsibility to make sure you do this. And it's had quite a lot of feedback within the sector as a result. And what it's trying to do is to say, if you've got the model that we had, not the current support model, but the model we had, Three things: disabled student allowance, individual reasonable adjustments, and an inclusive learning environment. We're doing all those three, broadly equally. That particular table is not put together scientifically, it's meant to demonstrate a point. Because the intent behind the guidance, the intent behind the shift, is to move from that type of approach to that one, where what you want to do is to make sure that you grow the bottom part of the pyramid, that you focus on what the institution should be doing, and there will always be people who require specific support under the DSAs. We can make anticipatory reasonable adjustment quite easily. My institution, I know that because for the last 10 years, every year, we've had at least 80 deaf or hearing impaired students and using British Sign Language, then we need to support that. It's not rocket science. It might move from 80 one year to 79, but it's still the same issue. And we know the number of students who will have SPLD. Not the number, but we know there'll be a significant number. So let's change what we do and focus on what the institution should do. This is a quote from 1996, a guy called Tomlinson, who did a report for the Further Education Funding Council. But think about this, just look at that and talk about every single student in your institution. This is about disabled students, that's what the quote's about. It could equally apply to every single student. We mean the greatest degree of match or fit between the individual's learner requirements and the provision that's made for them. This is about looking at the students that you've got, not the students that some of your colleagues might want you to have. This is about focusing the curriculum on who our student body is. And that creates a challenge for the sector and its regulators. And that challenge going forward is going to be really significant. Because yes, what we want to try and do is to make sure that all students are able to benefit. The more you do about inclusivity, it's a benefit to all, not simply a benefit to the individual. And we'll talk about that. Because, you see, what we want the sector and its regulators to be looking at is what is the model of inclusivity appropriate for an institution. And that might be very, very different for a specialist university that looks at agriculture to a big university with 40,000 students, or even bigger one that operates online. They're different things. But the institution should have an approach around inclusivity. And it should influence pedagogy. How we teach, what we teach, how we deliver it, how we design our learning and teaching facilities, how we design all our support facilities. And let's work on the basis that the student, and we talk a lot in higher education about students being independent learners. And all too often we forget that's a journey as well. They don't rock up on day one as an independent learner. It's about what do they do over a period of time and how do we get them there. Things like academic misconduct, where we have rule books, as opposed to, actually, why don't we just try and help you learn in the way that we want you to learn, how you can join this particular organisation and perform in a different way, and how we impact on learning and teaching strategies. We need managers to be firmly committed to it and make sure that we're able to influence that change. And that is about a challenge for Advance HE, which is about how we develop the managers in the sector to make sure that we develop that practice. Staff development, targeted training, all of that needs to be seen within the institution, the plan in the institution, appropriate to the institution. Anticipatory reasonable adjustments. Embed them. You broadly know what the mix of your student body from a disability background will be. You broadly know that. Yes, you will have the first time ever you've had this particular type of scenario. But anticipatory reasonable adjustments for most of the students coming into institutions is there and should be there. Now, some of the things we can do. Well, BSL, these are just examples. BSL. Our staff, for years, worked with colleagues on reinterpreting assessment wording so that our BSL users could understand them in their own language, in their own way. Why not just do that for all students and make it easier to understand and cut out that issue? SBLD. We over the years have kept laptop companies going. Provision of laptops to students. Open it up. Put it on all your PCs, all the specialist software. Allow them to access it with applications from anywhere outside the institution. Make it easy, make it just part of the system. Not, here's a laptop. Feedback on assessments, all you have to do is read the National Student Survey results, is variable. Well, let's focus on that, because in instances, and I've seen the learning contracts, where disabled students have been asked to have specific feedback on their assessment in a particular way that's accessible to them. Well, don't we want assessment feedback accessible to everybody? And that's about how you focus on that and how you work on that. This always goes down well with my colleagues. We, in our assessment in our modules, set out an assessment strategy. You know, different students coming from different backgrounds learn in different ways. They have ways in which they prefer their assessments. Why can't we give them a choice of how they are assessed? If somebody wants a 3-hour unseen examination, if somebody wants to do some coursework, why don't we let people do the assessment, and you can test the learning outcomes in exactly the same way. Why don't we let the student choose what that assessment is, rather than controlling it? Because that affects and how we manage our system. And it gives greater clarity. And it benefits all students, not simply a particular group. Lecture capture. There's a big debate about, does it mean that students don't come, etc.? Well, let's put it this way. The whole concept of the development of the virtual learning environments that takes place over the last 20-odd years has meant that the information and material is far more available to students. It's there for them to use, it's there for them to work with, and it's about, actually, let's just make it easier. Let's remember that our students are adults and it's up to them to decide what to do. And there's a big debate that takes place in universities about, should we require all students to attend everything? Or should we treat them as adults? And we did a big survey in the institution, and we found that 50% of the staff body thought we should make students attend, and 50% of the staff body thought we should treat them as adults and let them decide what they do. So what we did was sit on the fence. So it's the last time we do a survey. So it is about how are we going to make sure in what we do that we're continuing the journey that started all those years ago, hundreds of years ago. And many of you in this room, many of you will be impatient at the pace of change. I'm impatient at the pace of change. I'm trying to say that it has speeded up quite significantly over the last 20 years. And we have an opportunity today and over the next few years to make sure that if we take this agenda and we talk about making our institutions the home of inclusive learning, inclusive support, where we are saying these are the values of society, this is what we're seeking to do, then we will start to make the change that we've been looking for. And that change, once it gathers, and it's already gathered pace, once you gather momentum, you develop that change. And some of the things that you experience in your institutions today that weren't there 25 years ago are the result of some of that drive around learning and teaching strategies and about widening access. There's a lot of work still to be done, and we need to continue it. But I did say I'd talk about language and I'd talk about vocabulary just before I finish, which is to say that, you do have to be careful with words. And I remember working in an institution, which I wasn't going to name, but I think Gary's already named it, where we had this wonderful strapline, absolutely fantastic strapline. And we put on all the adverts, as you do. And I remember signing off an advert that went to the press. And I was more focused on some issues about it, and I just assumed the strapline would go in properly. And they got the words in the strapline, which I hadn't looked at, in the wrong order. And it's a strapline that if you get the words in the wrong order, actually isn't that clever. And the strapline, and I hope I get it the right way around, the strapline was supposed to say, confronting inequality, celebrating diversity. Now, you just put that in the wrong order, and you realize that you've got to be really careful with words, and I've used vocabulary throughout here, and trying to focus on actually vocabulary is important, but not all your colleagues have adopted the same vocabulary, which has changed over the years in the same way as we have developed as universities over the years. So take the challenge, push your institution. For those of you who are here from other organizations, push the sector. For those of you who are here, I'm not sure if anybody is here from the regulators like QAA and OFS. We need to address this. This needs to be in the quality handbook. This needs to be in issues to do with regulation, because that means we do it. But there's an awful lot of work in the development of our teams across institutions to do it, and I applaud all the work that you've done to date. So thank you very much, and I hope I've left time for questions, Gary, so that people can take me to pieces.
I'm going to open up for questions now. Do we have any questions from the floor? There's one here in the front.
Thank you. Moira Mitchell from Canterbury Christchurch, and thank you very much for that overview of where we've come from. I think it was for me, a very timely reminder. I just wanted to pick up on the issue of the choice of assessment methods, because in our university, I was involved in a very detailed quantitative analysis of outcomes across protected characteristics in a particular faculty, looking at assessment type. And we found, it was a study that was included actually in the HEFGE differential outcomes report. And we did find substantial differences which were really pointing the way to take action, which our university still hasn't done. And I just wondered how far you've managed to develop that and what the reactions, but what the consequences have been.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. We've made progress in certain subject areas and at particular levels. The one we've made the greatest progress in was law. Because what we got was a scenario where, and if you look at the latest differential outcomes report, you'll see for the first time it talks about performance of students from BTEC backgrounds. And what we got was relatively high proportion of students coming from a BTEC background or an access course who were not used to 3-hour unseen examinations. And the first year of our law degree was 3-year unseen examinations. So it wasn't fitting. So we had that debate and we shifted that. And you've now got students able to do a bit of choice, not wholesale choice. And the reason why you can't do that is that we have yet to fully educate the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, which is the body that regulates it. But we're having the debate. And you can see we've also tried to do it in pharmacy, which is particularly regulated for obvious reasons. And we've had some movement in certain areas of it. So it's a journey. One of the things we really want to do also is to make all our foundation year work formative assessment, rather than relying heavily on summative, because it is about how you as an individual learn. So limited progress, but it's there on the agenda.
Thank you, Geoff. There's a question over there and then one in the front here. So.
Good morning, my name's Mandy Jack from Swansea University. First of all, to say thanks for that brilliant keynote. There's a couple of things, but one of the things that I know our university struggles with in terms of providing, you said the laptop thing, and I've always said, why can't we just put them on all of them? And the answer's always money, because of course you've got to provide a whole site license for all these wonderful applications. What's your advice on that?
Should we take the second question first? Yeah. Should we take the other question as well? We'll take it in a round, so yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jessica from the University of Portsmouth. Really enjoyed your keynote. I want to talk about attendance as it relates to inclusivity. So when you said treat them as adults, actually the adults who report to me as a line manager have to show up to work. And for me, when I'm teaching students, for the students who learn best while they interact with their peers, that's diminished if their peers don't show up. And I think for me, having grown up in the US system, I've worked here 7 years now in higher education, but 13 years before that working in the United States, you have to show up. And as a first-generation student, working class background, I worked 3 jobs, but I still showed up because I had to. And I benefited from that. So I feel like for me that actually expecting attendance is an adult thing to do because we would expect that in the work world as well. So it's just related to attendance as an inclusion issue.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I wasn't saying that, sorry, I was saying what the survey said. Of what, I tend to be of the view that we need to be preparing people for the world of work. And there's a whole series of interventions that the DSA had, which people didn't have in the workplace when they go there. So you have to prepare people for the workplace. I was simply saying what the survey said. But that's because I tend to share I tend to share your view. Going back to the funding issue, I'm not going to be careful. There is a difference between English and Welsh funding systems. Okay? I'm familiar very much with the English funding system, but the Welsh funding system isn't that different. In universities, I suspect nearly every university strategic plan today says how important the student experience is. Money should not be an inhibitor. Money is found. Universities just have to simply invest in making sure that students can succeed. And it's as simple as that. And whilst there is no blank check, it is about prioritization. It is about what you want to invest your resource in and what you want out of it. And universities are communities of thousands of people. And it's about making sure that the people have the best opportunity. So I always get, I always take I get a bit short-tempered with the issue of we can't afford it. You know, we need to be able to afford it. Some of the students we're talking about have been through systems where they've suffered from lack of investment over years, lack of resource over years. They deserve it through the anticipatory adjustment, and we should just get on with it.
Hi, I'm Becky Lammerman, University of Kent. Thank you, first of all, for that really fantastic keynote speech. Just a couple of kind of points, I suppose, that we're learning at the University of Kent, because we've been working on this area for a few years now. Firstly, with regards to the accessibility tools on laptops, there's a number of free accessibility tools out there. You don't actually need to install them on laptops, you just need to provide links to them on a web page, and it doesn't cost the university a penny. And every student at the university then has direct access to them, and it mainstreams an awful lot of adjustments for 95% of students, and then you just have to focus on the 5% who might need very specific technology tools. Secondly, what we're finding at the moment is that the university can only go so far with regards to its internal systems. We're needing to do an awful lot of external lobbying. For example, we're working with the Southern Purchasing Consortium at the moment to work with digital publishers to ensure that all of the books that they provide for universities and libraries automatically come as e-copies to enable that kind of access. However, one university talking alone isn't a loud enough voice. What we really need is a collective from the sector really pushing at these external companies to be able to make this change mandatory. Another area is copyright law, for example. Copyright is massively out of date with regards to the current needs of universities, and we really need, again, that collective lobbying push to make those changes to legislation so that we're not in breach of copyright law if we suddenly provide a book in an e-copy. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Rankin from Imperial. So we are addressing this, and we have an inclusive teaching policy. One of the things that we have done relevant to this whole funding is that we ditched the DSA, and we are providing all our, in-house, we're providing all our assessments. And all the assistive technologies, we've now invested $250,000 in assistive technologies, providing them for all staff and students so that it is really inclusive. And one of the main drivers for that was because obviously we have a lot of international students, and this is not inclusive for international students that couldn't get the financial support from the UK government.
Hi, Jiten Patel from the Open University. You talked about sending a report to the governing body because they are now accountable for inclusivity. And I just wanted to ask you, what has your approach been to providing any mandatory diversity inclusion training to your governing body, and how diverse would you expect that body to be?
Okay. Shall I pick them up in reverse order?
Yeah.
So, what you're not aware of in the audience is there's three great big lights here, and I'm struggling to see you. Right, the issue about diversity training for governors in the governing body, we do that diversity training. There is an annual session. There's an annual session for all governors, but there's an additional session for new governors, and I suspect that most governing bodies are, you asked about diversity of the governing body, we have control over a certain part of the membership, because a certain part of the membership of our governing body is elected, and you don't have any control of that. But you'd expect, and the sector's made some progress, got a long way to go, that you should be broadly diverse in your area. We seek to make sure that our staff body is representative of our local community, both academically and support staff. And we have the data that we look at to measure that, and we do the same with our board. The imperial question, imperial comment, yeah, I applaud you, and I should have picked up the fact that international students, for years, people who've been doing fantastic jobs in disability support offices have said, oh, we've got these international students and we haven't got any money for them because the DSA doesn't cover them. Well, that's the whole issue, you're quite right. The DSA is was partial, but institutions have a responsibility to every single student. And I think, was it Kent? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're dead right about all the things that you can do around assistive technology. I was trying to make the point that you don't have to give everybody a laptop, but you're right, you've just taken it further. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But, and one of the things that we have a problem with at the moment in the sector is about getting a focus to do the sort of things that you were talking about. Because all too often, when you want to influence, there isn't a body. Yeah. Some of that has been lost. Yeah. And I guess I'm in a bit of a privileged position because I can do things slightly differently. I'm going back to the Imperial where you said, I think you said about £250,000 on assistive technology. I think you said that. We reshaped that, and we didn't use any of that vocabulary because I just said, when we're doing the new PCs, just make sure they're fully inclusive. Before we didn't have to go through that process. But I'm just lucky in terms of position of being able to do that. Still have challenges though. We have great issues over language and vocabulary and getting things done, but it's on the agenda and seeking to work out. And there's some brilliant examples of what people are doing out there in the audience.
Indeed. And on that note, I'm going to thank Geoff and thank you all for your comments and questions and your examples. I encourage you to keep sharing your examples throughout the day. So can we thank Geoff for his keynote, please?